My name is Mark Morrison, and I work for Unity Technologies. I work in the business development unit in the United States, so I handle Americas. Actually, I'm going to backtrack here. There is me. So we are today going to talk about producing games and apps on multiple platforms. So in other words, cross-platform development and publishing. So I work in the US. I've got peers that handle other regions, and I would encourage you guys to meet them while you're here. Most of us are here this week. And on the business side, we have an organization, a unit that's, we call it sales, but it involves engineering, evangelism, business development, account management. So if you have any questions, really the email for business for sales this week is up on the screen. It's sales@unity3d.com. Again, I'm Mark Morrison. I've been at Unity for a couple years, and I've been in the video game space for quite a while. I've been in the video game space for 12 years. When I'm out in the field, which is primarily what I do with field engineering and evangelism to raise awareness and see clients and customers, quite often we are approached with the issue of, the cross-platform business. And in my opinion, that is probably one of the main value props for Unity, and it probably is why we're a very popular engine out in the marketplace right now. So I do think this is an incredible industry to be in. We've had a lot of sea change lately, for better, a little bit for worse, but it's ever changing. So it's pretty exciting to me to be a part of it. And today the intention here is to share a little bit of history of multiple platforms. I'm going to coin it cross-platform because nowadays that's what we're calling it. So share a little bit of information historically about mainly the game space. Some assumptions to make today are I'm talking about games, but it doesn't necessarily apply only to games. As social media and transmedia and all the different medias are growing and emerging medias are coming, we're seeing different applications. So an assumption can be made that this is applicable, in my opinion, across other verticals, not just games. So today, just going to go through a little bit of history and talk about one or two of my experiences in the past with developing a title or a franchise at the same time across different engines, briefly. And then we're going to segue. I've got a couple of surprise guests here today that have fortunately agreed to come up and share their experiences. And then I would like to take some questions, and my guests, I think, are capable of answering some questions as well. So there you have it. That's what we're going to do today. Quick question. Who do we have in the crowd? Let's by a show of hand. Do we have business people here in the media space? Business people, by show of hands. Okay. Do we have producers in the house? And those could be business people too. How many engineers? Strictly engineers. Really? Oh man, my heart just fluttered. Okay. Well, that's very interesting actually, and I'm glad you guys are here. I hope you have some questions. I don't often get a lot of questions on the business side from engineers. How many people here like to play games? Okay, good answer. And how many people here are actually Unity developers? Okay, how many people are not Unity developers? So I can pick on you. Oh, good, okay, I'm gonna get you after this one. So it's always nice to know who's in the crowd and what you guys do. I guess one last question. How many people in the room are currently developing for console? Not necessarily with Unity, but on console currently. Okay, cool, so there's some. And this is an interesting area because as we used to think of consoles, and what you're seeing up here on the screen, I grabbed some pictures because pictures are always nice to look at. I would consider consoles nowadays really any platform because when you look at we'll look at some install base here, it's so deep on some of these newer, tablets and devices that we didn't call console, that I would say that the below line here is really what we're looking at on our side as the cross-platform capabilities of Unity, and again that's a huge value prop in my opinion. It's one of the reasons why I think Unity is so widely used around the world. So let's go a little bit into the history really quickly of the console cycle generation because it gives us some context for the future. And how many people actually had a Pong or an Odyssey? Oh, come on. Just one, two? Okay, so this was a long time ago. This is when it was very, very static. It was a kind of a wild frontier. We went up through time. Probably more of you had the Coleco, the 2600. These were games that were being developed specifically for these devices. There wasn't what we have now, kind of a middleware, a software business. Specifically, Pong was designed for the hardware with specific code. So we move up into time. And we get into, I didn't even realize this until I was doing some intel this week, that we had the 8th generation here now. And there's been announcements. I may not have all the, I'm using the internet, so forgive me if my years are 1 or 2 years off. And we've got the announcement that Wii U and Windows 8 is out. So, we're in a new generation now, and what's next is, we can probably assume, other consoles announcing. So it's interesting to think about. We go back 72, we go back a long time with various platforms out there to be able to reach your customers. And we're here today really talking to you all, hopefully Unity customers or prospective Unity customers, Unity developers who are wondering, okay, well, what is this cross-platform business all about? Because obviously when you're developing in Unity, you're on PC and Mac. And where you go from there is actually this extended business and reaching out. So remember this, it's been a long history. I didn't do a collage of all the different platforms out there, but there's probably hundreds that have not succeeded. And a lot have. I'm actually surprised that there's as many current active hardware devices out there. I mean, even in my home, we've got PS3, Xbox plugged in, 2 iPads, 2 Androids. So we've probably got 8 or 9 devices on in our house. Probably similar out there in the crowd. For you all today, and to benefit from this, it's important for me as a business development representative of Unity to make sure that you have information, that we're sharing information. So really, I think where we start here is in the cross-platform talk, are you a cross-platform candidate? And that's a good question because we have customers who aren't. They strictly are on the PC for the PC business. Could even be standalone. There are then PC developers who are getting into multiplayer or streaming with the web player. So I think that's a good question to ask yourself, and hopefully you asked yourself before you came in here and answered, well, maybe, because I think there's going to be a little bit more information here to give you a better idea of where you can study, where your business can go cross-platform. Obviously, it reaches a wider demo, and I think that's another thing. You have to think about who is your demo, who you're trying to reach. I mean, many of us have great ideas. In fact, many of us have better than great ideas. And, the execution on those is obviously very important. But in terms of what you do now and what you do tomorrow, I think it's important to always be reflective, introspective, looking in, and just understanding, okay, I've got a partner, we're making a game on PC, what should we do with that in Unity beyond PC? Here's some numbers. I like numbers and images. I grabbed some of these recently. They're not mine, but I think they're probably close to what we know out there. Starting from the bottom up, I mean, billions of PCs and Macs. That's a great opportunity. And I'm not going to turn this into a, kind of pushing Unity talk, but it's obvious why we're here and what we're doing. And, really, I think that is what has created such a fantastic foundation to have you all, which I also think is one of the main value props of Unity, is our community. You all are Unity, in my opinion. You're a part of Unity in a big way, part of the business. So these billions of PCs and Macs out there, over 400 million Android devices. When they started speculating and forecasting that a couple years ago, that was crazy. And there's another story on the side we won't talk about, which is, for those of you that were in the mobile days, the Java Symbian mobile days, we're getting back to some fragmentation now. Not the same that we had back then, but we're getting to some fragmentation because the Android ecosystem is different in that it's fairly open. It's got the more ubiquitous code base, so it's allowing for more companies, more regions, more hardware to enter in with tablets. I'm very excited about the Android market. But again, it's something to look at for yourself if you're not an Android developer. On console, I won't go back into the past numbers, but I looked at these numbers last night and it surprised me because the last generation, if you knew those numbers, we're pretty big. I think they're getting where they need to be now, but again, that's a different talk that we won't get into. So planning for cross-platform properly, I think that's a big theme for you all today, and it's what I'd like to field some more questions about, and my friends on stage will help me as well once they come up. So what's your business? Are you a developer? Are you an aspiring developer? Are you a student? Are you a hobbyist? Because really my philosophy in being a hobbyist developer and more of a business person and on the production side is you really have to start with a solid block of cheese. And that solid block of cheese is your business. And just start poking holes in it. Well, if your business is to make the best basketball game in the world, is it the best basketball game in the world, right? And I'll jump around a little bit here, but one thing I always do when I'm thinking about an idea, I go on the internet, I look for that idea. I usually find it. And if it's an app or a game, I almost always find it. So that's one of the things I can share with you personally, just from the development standpoint, in looking at other opportunities where you need to invest money. Is there a return there, okay? How are you all forecasting? Do you do your P&L? If you're making $100 profit on PC, how much will it cost to take it over to Android? If it costs $100 and you think you can make the $100 back, I know it sounds simple, but that's part of the process of vetting that. So, and how do you study your competitive landscape? I mean, I think that's one of the biggest omissions in the kind of the current cross-platform developer versus in the past it's been very traditional. Publishers, big money, big companies. They're able to come in and actually, put an army of analysts on something to study the PS1 to PS2 transition. Again, coming back to the theme here, are you a cross-platform developer and why? So if you can find yourself in a situation envisioning the return on your investment, and it's not just money too, it's experience. A large part of the fun of working at Unity is finding customers who are doing things with our products that I never imagined them doing. And then even more than that is the teams growing themselves with this Unity knowledge base. Artists learning engineering, engineering learning, design, and more of the kind of the gameplay mechanic stuff. How do you fund your business? Are you funding it personally? I meet a lot of Unity developers who are super, super passionate. They're also pretty smart and wise. They've saved a bunch of money. They're going to build out some product. But again, you got to come back to, does it make sense to go to Mac? Does it make sense to go to Android? Does it make sense to get into the Android marketplace and hit those? Recently, I've heard it's gone from at least 50 minimum required handsets through the normal channels. If you're going to publish and you want to hit every region, now I've heard it's 200. So back to the fragmentation thing with Android, you've got to reach a wider variety of handsets. It's more costly to do a Q&A and to localize and to benchmark and test. So a lot of the planning for cross-platform, I think, starts with what you have now. You're in the PC or the Mac, you're building this app or this game. Will it translate well? That's something I didn't put up here. Will this translate well to, we're now seeing a huge surge in touchpads, high-end visual, high-end graphics, high-end physics in a pad, all the new processors that are coming out. So when you're building that game based on a keyboard or based on certain actions, will it translate well to the other platforms? So there's all these different things that I always recommend thinking about ahead of time. And again, this piece of cheese is on the table. If you can take Swiss cheese from that, I usually move along. Go get another block of cheese and try again. Obviously no revenue coming in, that's a bit of a problem. And because Unity is so widely used on the basic and on the free side especially, there isn't a risk there if you're a student, right? But if you're a developer and you're using our basic set of tools, that may work for you. And obviously if you need to be in compliance with our EULA. We do have a EULA, and the basic is different than the pro. So I always encourage you to understand if you're a developer who can use the basic version or not. But a lot of times that's not enough for what you need. So getting into pro, well, that costs money. So you need to really be able to understand, I think, what your future revenue opportunities are. Otherwise, to me, maybe you're not a cross-platform candidate yet. I really think you need to have the opportunity. I'm going to be careful here. I'm going to say, thinking randomly right now, I think you want to have the opportunities for these cross-platform opportunities before you come up with this idea that it could be a good opportunity. In other words, if you see your style of game out there in the Android marketplace doing well, that seems like a good opportunity to me. If you see that genre out there and it's not doing well, well, then you can look back in and you can decide for yourself. But chances are it may be that that's enough information to tell you to move on to the other platform. And unfortunately, some of the great images that I have, I could, probably you can't see well enough, but this week, just finding all these different systems, there's a lot out there. And for the most part, none of these succeeded. Some did. So I think you have to ask yourself, what does it mean to you? And why would you go to the trouble to release on the iOS platform? And there's lots of great reasons as to why, but planning and this type of scenario is, while fun, has been known to not always come together. The paperclip sometimes doesn't work. So again, planning is good. So ask yourself what your objective is. Be really careful. Be really specific. I think that my son is probably going to be a focus tester soon. I mean, kids are great. Kids are so fantastic for testing your ideas and, friends, colleagues. Maybe some of you do this, probably all of you do, but I just always am thinking back into myself, what can I do to make it better, to be better? So I was going to share just a little bit of my experience from Atari and Midway, because there was three examples that I could share. And then we'll go in. I'm going to get a little bit more experience share here from some other folks, some veteran guys coming from the console space too. So some of you might have played these games, right? Let's see. I was at Atari during Enter the Matrix, and it was a game. There was some fun in it. There were some floating cops. There were, let's see, PS2, Xbox. 64. There were probably 8 SKUs. I think Enter the Matrix had 8 SKUs, maybe 9. And it was made with, I think it's 4 different engines. So this meant that the publisher, Atari, and the lead developer, that was Shiny, had to cover over a 2 to 3 year period. And this one was interesting because it was tied to a movie. So there were some real dependencies here. But this game was made with multiple engines. Spy Hunter is another example. This particular version with The Rock, I believe, had 2 engines. That was from Midway. And then Happy Feet, that's the Wii version up on the screen, that was developed by, and Matrix was 3 different developers. Spy Hunter was 3 developers. Happy Feet, I think, was 4 developers. And all of them, was the full lineup of SKUs. So the point here is these were major productions, cross-platform, multiple, same franchise, 1 SKU across multiple platforms. And this is what they ran into. And I am picking on those games. I mean, Atari and Midway, I love them to death. But those particular games, while fun, had some significant downside in terms of different engines and those dependencies. So, this was the outcome for basically all of those. And again, Matrix and Happy Feet were movie ties. So that helped in terms of revenue. I didn't put the revenue up here. I figure that's something you can probably find for yourself. Ironically enough, the movie licenses, when they're around and they're good, they do pretty well. They have a short life cycle, but they do pretty well. So, my experience has been that with Unity, I'm finding these opportunities are out there for cross-platform. I'm going to turn it over to two of my guests. They're going to talk briefly. I do want to get into Q&A pretty quickly. So we'll spend maybe another 10 minutes talking and then some Q&A because we have the hard stop. But I'm going to introduce a good friend, actually, and an amazing Unity developer who owns a company called Galaxy Pest Control, and they're in Malibu, California. They've had some recent real big success with Unity, got a couple of cool things in the pipeline. And Jamie's got a little experience he's going to share, and then I'll introduce Tom after that. So come on up, Jamie, and give us your wisdom, please.
Oh, thanks. You call it wisdom?
Jamie Ottley, folks.
What's that?
Cool dude, too.
So, just quick background. I've been making games for 19 years. I lived through most of the generations that Mark mentioned as a professional developer. And I'll give you basically my last non-Unity game story from a cross-platform development standpoint. We used the Emergent system, Gamebryo, to build a kids MMO that shipped in 2009. And we were 2.5 years into development, 30 days out from launch. And private equity owned and funded business. And my board decided basically the month before we were due to ship that it was imperative that we have a max SKU at launch. So I spent the first week of that 30 days trying to talk them out of this terrible idea, which didn't work so well. I learned a lesson that, wealthy private equity funds decide something and dictate they don't really want to hear why they're wrong. I spent the next 3 weeks basically taking my tech director, myself, and my lead producer off the product, scouring the world for a solution to create a max SKU that did not involve rewriting the game engine or taking the source code from Emergent and porting Gamebryo to the Mac ourselves. And we discovered a company in Canada that had a wrapper that would allow us to basically run the PC version of our game on Intel-based Macintoshes. So after all of this sort of running around, figuring out what to do, we came up with a plan. We delayed the PC launch by 60 days in order to have the Mac version ready for launch. And what we discovered post-launch, after effectively investing months of time, several $100,000, is that 3% of our installs were on the Macintosh. And it's an added benefit because it was a wrapper-based system being provided by an external company that had its own QA pathway. It added 30 days to every deployment cycle that we wanted to do on a live content game. And so this sort of goes back to Mark's point about doing your research before you decide to go cross-platform, and why, because certainly financially it made no sense. And then also, choose your tools carefully in terms of what your future plans are for content. Fast forward to today, and my studio with 15 developers is doing 4 products that are being developed simultaneously for browser-based PCs, iOS, Android, and Steam in terms of downloadable clients. And on average, it takes us about 20 man days to transition to any platform that Unity is supporting. So we've been pretty happy.
Yeah. That's good. Thanks for sharing. Don't go away. I'm going to have you sit down. You're going to help us with Q&A. Thank you, Jamie.
It's not beer time yet.
Let's give a hand for Jamie real quick. Thank you. So our next guest is Tom, and I'm working with Tom now, actually. Tom Catola is from Wide Load Games, and pretty significant team. I'll let him introduce himself, but I will tell you this, that this is an amazing team. It's done a lot with Unity. They have a lot of experience doing the previous stuff that Jamie and I were talking about. So Tom's just going to share a little experience and information, and then there's a couple other subjects that I would like to get into, but I really would like to get to the Q&A just so that everybody has a chance to really kind of get their questions out and we can get into it. And Tom and Jamie have been nice enough to offer their wisdom for the Q&A. So Tom Catola.
Hi. My name is Tom Catola. I'm the tech director at Wide Load Games. We're a wholly owned by Disney mobile studio, and I've been doing games since 1994, primarily on console, and I have been doing mobile games on and off since 2002. And now that we're doing, mobile only using Unity, the challenges for us have changed significantly. So in the past, when we've done multi-SKU development, that development has been constrained by programmer and art resources. So you will work on, one platform, move on to the next, move on to the next, and our ability to do multiple projects has been limited by, the engineers that we have available. Since we switched over to Unity, the constraints that we have in getting projects done have switched from specifically engineer and art time to a management task. It takes us a very short amount of time to support a new platform, and so we have to be very careful about managing engineer time. We make sure that, if we're working on the Android version, that there's 1 week out of the month that we dedicate to the Android version, as opposed to having developers switch day to day which platform they're working on. We have to do the same thing with our art resources. We have to line everybody up so that people are switching at the same time. Artists are available at the same time as engineers. QA is available at the same time. So this is the big challenge that we've had doing multi-SKU development. You have to be careful about the number of platforms you want to support, because it is, even though your engineering can do it, you got to make sure you have the management in place. You want to adopt things like the asset bundles early on. You want to assume that you're going to run on multiple platforms, and be very sort of careful about the choices that you make, so you don't lock yourself in or lock out particular versions. So.
It's good information.
Yeah.
So I appreciate these guys sharing, because they're in the trenches like a lot of you guys. I get to visit with you, but I don't actually get in there and dig the holes. But let me ask you a question, Tom. If you and Tom, there's a sensitive nature is that Tom's product isn't released yet, so I'll be careful when asking. In planning for your various mobile platforms, was that done concurrently, or was it staggered so that you had a lead SKU that was validated by, let's call it the margin model, which is your profit margin? I mean, do you know if it was all planned together, or were you guys staggering the way that it was being planned?
So it's interesting. I mean, this is a problem that you're going to run into as a developer, a smaller studio. We're wholly owned by Disney, and our product was considered an iOS project when we started. We went with the assumption that they were going to ask for other platforms later on during the development cycle, and that's something, an important decision you want to make early on. You want to know, even if there aren't multiple SKUs planned, is this something that's likely to happen? And if so, you want to start laying the groundwork so that you can make that switch over as quickly as possible. We did a little bit of pre-planning. We talked a lot with the Unity guys and asked them for best practices. You can read on the forums a lot of other people's experiences and make sure you sort of take their advice and from the problems that they've encountered. When we ended up getting the Android build done, this was after Apple approval, and it took us one engineer spent roughly a week to go from iOS to Android. We had some performance things that we had to worry about, things to work on, but we ended up with a fully playable Android version in about just a week's time.
Wow.
So,
but on the production side, you guys were planning. So I guess I should have.
Internally, yes, we were planning. Internally, we were planning. I can't speak directly to what the headquarters does. Right. They didn't come to us and say, "You guys are going to be doing the Android version," but we knew that it was going to be a likely.
But this is an interesting takeaway, because as we find the majority of the folks that are in this room are engineering, this is some business takeaway too, because you all are probably doing the same, because you're usually a day or two ahead of those upstairs. But on the business side, it's probably, always a question separately. But on the production side, it sounds like both Jamie and Tom's teams, as they work, are thinking about that for business. And again, that's the opportunity that's out there on those platforms. So, so that's good. That's good info, and appreciate. Let's give Tom a little round of applause here.
Thank you.
So these guys have been kind enough to stick around, and what I'm hoping, because if you don't have questions, I've got questions for you, is that there's some questions out there that we can actually get into a little bit deeper. And hopefully there's some of you out there that are considering other platforms. So we've got a couple of our friends here that have mics. We want to record this, so if you have a question, raise your hand, and they'll try to set up the question after the one that's happening. So let's do some questions. We've got one in the back.
Hi, I wanted to know if for multiple platform support, if you first develop a high graphic version of the game and downscale everything, or if you target first mobile devices and upscale everything for PC or Mac.
That's an absolutely great question. I'm actually going to let Jamie answer that. But when we answer that, can you kind of repeat it? Because it's an interesting question and a little bit deeper one. People in this room may not understand exactly what you're saying. In other words, do you plan for the super AAA version, or do you go from something simpler and more easy? And I'll let, actually, if Jamie feels comfortable, talk about his experience. Sure.
So we try and plan for the highest end platform that we're likely to go to from the outset. It's much easier to de-res art than it is to up-res art. So we'll start, we actually do all of our initial work on PC and then move down to the mobile platforms, even if we're primarily developing a mobile title. In our experience, inevitably, even if you don't go to a higher end platform, at the end of the product, there'll be marketing requests or needs that will require those higher end art assets in order to sweeten the graphics that are be using in those materials. So in general, we plan for the highest and move down.
Our experience was similar. We had to go through several different pitch meetings, and so we always did the highest end platform for that. One thing that you want to think about is mobile platform space is evolving so rapidly with new devices coming out. You want to be careful on the number of low-end platforms that you're going to support, because you get stuck with legacy support throughout the life of your game, especially if you're planning on doing in-app updates and these sort of things. So you want to make sure you have your pitch ready as to why you're not going to do the 3GS or these lower end phones.
Interesting. Who else? We got questions out there. Somebody, anybody, come on. Really? We got one there. There we go. Now's the time, you guys. We got experts here, so really don't be shy. I mean, if there's information you're even wondering about, now's the time. No, there's not any question that's stupid. Coming to you next. Cool. Hang on one sec. You're second. Yeah, we're getting questions. He's going to bring you a mic here, and then you'll be after the gentleman behind you. Thank you. Okay, you're second. Hang on. He's got the mic. Thank you, though. You're right next.
Hello. Just the first comment from my experience, I would advocate exactly the contrary, but that's different. If you are really going for multiple platform, make absolutely sure that you can strip down your content so that it can run on the low-end device. Because you might be able to downscale your graphics. It's much more difficult to downscale your gameplay. And if you've got too many, I don't know, characters on screen, whatever shader you use, it's not going to run on a 3GS. And effectively, as one of your two friends said, usually your marketing will want you to serve the legacy device and will strongly question the fact that it doesn't run on a 3GS.
Fantastic comment, and that's very relevant. So a little bit more editorial there on my thinking is, you're right. For that scenario, you're right. But what's happening there is now we're actually talking about, did you feel out how this would work on and translate on the other platform? So from Jamie's experiences where he's dealing with big, high-end studios, movie studios, chances are they're wanting to come out with something that's going to go deep blue, social, or the internet, browser-based, could be iPad. But that is an interesting point, because at the point of game design, that's probably not something that can be changed without going back in. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, to clarify, I took the question to be source art in terms of where we're creating that. When it comes to low-end system, you need to basically create a playable version that LODs down early on in the process and maintain your target frame rates throughout the cycle. But that doesn't, I took the question from a source artwork standpoint, not from I go all the way through the end of the cycle on iPad 3 and then go, oh, gee, it's got to run on a 3GS or an iPad 1.
But it's good to think about because they're related, right? So these are the types of things when we get back to the planning header, you've got to plan properly. Is this something that's going to be eventually very photoreal, high poly count, physics? And that's where we're back. Are you a game developer or what do you do?
Yes, I am. I'm going to make a speech tomorrow morning presenting what we did, Total War Battles.
Okay.
But from experience, if I may add a second thing, because none of you talked about, games are more and more being seen and viewed as services, which means you've got your game, which is your core engine, your game, but now you have got more and more services around that. By services, I mean social link, I mean ladders, I mean achievement, and I mean more and more in the digital space, in-app purchase. Be very wary if you do multiple SKUs that these services relate to a given ecosystem, and you will have to adapt to different ecosystem. If you're on iOS, you do these things through Game Center, for example. If you decide to go on Android, you might find but on Android, you don't have if you are on Google Play, you don't have any standalone solution for achievement, which means you might be forced to code your own achievement display, which you didn't have to do on another SKU. But if you move on PC, and you are on Steam, you have to rewire again, and that's engineering time every time. So that's something to consider, how you are going to port not only your game, but also your services.
So next year you're going to be a part of the multiple ecosystem on same platform talk. We're going to do it. What time is your talk tomorrow?
10 in the morning.
10 o'clock, is it next door in this theater?
No, it's in this room.
In this room. So come back tomorrow morning because we've got a good mind here that's got some good information to share. Thank you very much. And with the Mac, you've got a question.
Is it active? What can you tell me about Flash licensing? What constraints does it put on distributing the app? Do we have to get our own license with Adobe? And would it work with
you would have to ask me the tricky questions in front of everybody. We have announced Flash support. There's pricing that's been announced. We've got our good friends from Adobe here who can definitely answer all of the Adobe questions. That's actually a two-part question. The question that I can answer is for Unity. We will support both with the two levels of our licensing model. So there'll be a lower end of basic and there'll be a pro. You'll be able to use that product to deploy out your Swift files in Flash. There's a lot of different information out there that's being circulated, but the best source for Adobe's business would be Adobe, and we work very closely with the platform and our friends that are here, and our engineering side is working daily to improve, and we're tracking this to be a release forthcoming. But I guess it sounds to me like your question is, what's the business model on the Adobe side? Is that your question?
As a developer, what constraints does it put on me? From what they told me, I would have to run it off, get a license with them, and then run it off of a certain server. And then, that's all I want. Like, if I wanted to make an open source free game using Unity, would people that want to run it have to execute a
Well, you'll have to. I
agreement with
mean,
Adobe?
so I definitely am not going to embarrass the company by answering technical questions up here today. You will have to serve your content. If you're streaming content out to customers, then it would have to originate somewhere. And we don't do that as a service yet.
My impression was Adobe kind of locks it to coming off of that machine, or to that host
The
name.
business model for what is happening with Unity and Flash, I won't actually be able to answer that to you right now. I could probably talk to you after this and lead you to a couple folks that could give you a little bit more in-depth information. The restraints you have right now using Unity, you've got to buy a license and it's got to be in compliance with our EULA, any first or second party. So I think that there's a lot of information there that I'd like to give you, this probably isn't the perfect forum for that because we're evolving everything and it hasn't actually released yet. But everybody here has probably seen a lot of the Unity content in Flash. Works really, really well. You know, yesterday's video and keynote, and then additions from our Adobe friends. To me, it's very exciting. I mean, what I can say is that is a way for Unity to reach a new platform, you know, and that's just for us, that's our business. So, but I'd be happy to afterwards. Let's have a little chat, and I can lead you to a couple folks and share. All right, what else? What else? Come on, we got some more questions. We're here. We're now. Is anybody looking to deploy in console this year? Anybody looking to deploy in console? Jorge in the back. Jorge is from an incredible Unity studio in Guatemala City. So Guatemala City in the house. Oh, okay. Hang on one sec.
Yeah, hi, I'm Wolf. We are developing on a game called Beat Buddy, which is going to be simultaneously released in 2013 in summer for PC, Mac, Xbox, and PlayStation 3. And I was kind of wondering, like, what would you suggest on which platform should you put the strongest emphasis? You know, like, because we were talking about, you know, you had that Mac deployment and it was just 3% install base. What do you think right now, and also maybe also in a year, that's kind of hard to predict, would be the hardest markets or the most important platform? You know, it's hard to tell, but I'm just interested in your opinion.
So a couple questions, and I'd like these guys to answer. Where are you based as a developer?
Hamburg, Germany.
Hamburg, Germany.
Yeah.
So is your customer base in Europe, or are you looking for global?
No, it's all on the American market. We are publishing over Reverb Publishing, so
Yeah,
it's
sure.
mainly North America and then Europe and maybe Japan because it's a music game. So.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, let me let a couple pros here even give you a little.
It's very hard to answer without looking at the demographic of your game. I mean, the question you're asking is very specific to the content that you're creating and the user experience that you're creating. And I would hate to give you advice based on games that we're doing that doesn't apply to what you're up to. I would say that I favor the digital platforms now. If you're looking at console retail, I don't. That isn't where I would invest my efforts at the moment. I'm also biased towards tablets, but.
From a development perspective, what I've found works the best is pick your two most different platforms, the ones that have the strictest limitations that are differing from each other. Trying to do all 4 or 5 platforms simultaneously gets very difficult, and if you pick your two most different platforms, hopefully there's similarities with the other ones that you aren't directly working on, and work on those two simultaneously, you'll be able to work out most of the difficulties and problems that you're going to encounter when going on to, you know, all your other platforms. So, you know, sometimes your limitations may be more around gameplay as opposed to actual performance. Sometimes it might be a performance limitation, but, you know, you might want to pick like PC and a tablet, something like that, and work on those two simultaneously.
I can add a little bit there too. So are you all, they're acting as your publisher for the world or just the US, Reverb?
It's worldwide, but
Worldwide.
I mean, like the hierarchy is really
Okay.
North America, Europe, Japan, and then, you know, the rest.
Okay, so I always like to be careful here. I'm not going to ask you questions that you would answer accidentally that you shouldn't. So I'm going to be sensitive here on you keeping your kind of your business to yourself. A couple of things though. If you yourselves look at the marketplace and the growth in the last 5 years and forecast the next 5, and you see what type of game it is, who the demo is. I mean, even you in your studio, you guys can just do this sitting around the computer and having lunch and kind of talk about it. Again, come back to the kids. They're always free help. Actually, they get compensated. I don't want to get in trouble here on the labor laws. They get food and shelter and toys. You know, who is Reverb as a publisher? What are their strengths? What's the current release date compared to what the marketplace is in the US? If you're going to come out, and so this is really just a brushstroke of many, many, many talks that we should have about this subject, but I think you have to really analyze what is it that you're trying to do and where do you think your best opportunities are for that revenue. Obviously, releasing games at Christmas time is really, really opportunistic. People want to buy games at Christmas. Spring to summer has generally been, in my 12 years of the business, a softer period of time for physical media. Jamie brings a good point. Digital is much less out of pocket, you know, and our friend in the back talks about services and ecosystems and, you know, the freemium versus, you know, for pay and different things make a difference. So I think to answer your question, probably it's best to go with the more cost-efficient, kind of higher conversion. So if it's freemium, obviously you want the traffic, because it's all about numbers, right? I mean, it's more than that, but it is a numbers game. You've got to convert on larger numbers. So it's a good question, but I think you also have to study the relationship. And the fact that Reverb isn't, you know, a 20-year veteran in the publishing business doesn't mean they're not going to be one tomorrow. And just because they don't have 20 years of history in console doesn't mean they're not one of the best partners to have right now in that space. But my guess is, just personally, going towards the digital is where I'm drawn to stay as a consumer. It's where I sit more on the business side.
Can I, just to add something, whatever you're doing, you and your publisher should be in lockstep, because it isn't the game, the demographic you're after, the initial user experience, the marketing and where that's targeted, wherever they're going after distribution, all that stuff has to line up. So I would just add that you should make a point of making sure all of those pieces are in alignment, and that whoever's leading dev clearly understands the demographic that it's being marketed to, and vice versa, that the marketing people understand who you're building the game for. Those are the easiest ways to get yourself in trouble that are solvable.
Thanks a lot on all that feedback. Can I change the question a little bit to...
One more real quick additive, though. In the film business, I was in the music space a long, long time ago, and I used to see checks getting written to artists. $300,000, go make an album. But then they'd get bills for the recording costs and the overnight lodging and the food and everything else. In the movie space, there's something called adjusted gross, and there's a different kind of spectrum of how money is given and then taken back. In the game space, you want to be careful, too, to set up, as Jamie said, in a line so that the expectations meet both sides. In other words, if you're going out on physical media now, I didn't actually include the physical media slide, but that's a whole other subset of really interesting history. If you're going to go out in physical media now, it costs money. Chances are that's going to be recouped. So the important word here is recoupment. Will there be recoupment before you see profit? So a lot of the business, but I think a really, really great point is, you know, be in alignment with your partners. Go ahead on the second one.
I would just, since you kind of got me thinking for another question, is like, is the combination of PC, Mac, Xbox, and PSN with Unity a healthy combination? I mean, we kind of decided for us that it's not the healthy combination to have a 3DS, iPad, tablet, and then a PC version altogether, because you have different screen resolutions, you have different performance issues and stuff like that. So just from your experiences, is that a workflow that is gonna take forever and ever in the Goldmaster to get the bugs finished out, or could that be possible done in 8 or 9 months, going from, you know, alpha to the gold version? I mean, it's a downloadable content title, around 5 hours gameplay, stuff like that. So just, is that a healthy combination from your Unity console experience?
I don't think technically that there's, you know, your challenges in that case aren't going to be technical so much as does the gameplay work on all those different platforms. Each one of them is going to have different strengths and weaknesses, right, and you just need to be careful and make sure that all of those make sense.
I think that we're going to jump to one last question really quick. We have 3-4 more minutes, so we have just one more question with Jorge. That goes back to the idea and the concept and the gameplay, and does it work for, in my opinion, you know, does it work for that format? So anyway, good question. It exposed a lot that we could share with you guys, so thanks for that.
Thanks a lot for your feedback.
Thank you. Okay, one more question with our friend Jorge from Lineworks.
Thank you, Mark. We're doing a game for PS3 and for Xbox 360, motion control basically. But after we started to develop, we find out that we can keep the traditional controller. So some suggestions came that we should also port it to the PS Vita and to the iPad. Does it work to have afterward releases? For example, if we go for the console first and then for the other ones?
It works if your game's a hit.
Exactly. Well, you know, this is going to seem silly, but Angry Birds, plushies, those are happening. Those make sense. They're not what the game was, but my kids got a bunch of them. You know, it's an interesting question. I think it is back to previous thing we were talking about. Does it make sense for the? I mean, I think you have to run a margin model, have to run a P&L and see if it's worth it. And again, if you've got a publisher who's willing to bank it and they're good at selling Wii U, go for it. That's going to be a great launch. Otherwise, I know what you all are working on. They're working on a really very interesting game, and I think you all have taken it from the right perspective of let's go for our marketplace and something that will be exciting for our gamers in our region. That's another thing. I believe if you can win at home, you can win away games. If you can't win at home, it sounds silly, but it's hard to win away because we know what we can do at home. We know our consumers. In Guatemala, kind of the threshold for gaming, and while there's not a lot of consoles in LATAM right now, it's growing immensely. And LATAM is an incredibly growth, oriented place for gaming now. So I think, with you all looking at the platforms you've looked at first and going from there, as Jamie said, if it's a hit, go for it. So you guys, I'm sorry that I was late today. I'm going to stay afterwards, and I'll be here tomorrow. And please do email sales@unity3d.com. The way that we get you into any new product is we can give you extended trials. So if you're an actual interested party or developer, we can extend trials to you. On console, you'll have to be a registered developer to use first-party middleware. So you actually have to be an Xbox, PS3, or Wii developer to use our console products. But we are really excited about the growth on the console side for us. We're excited about all the platforms, and especially Unity 4 with the new platforms coming there. I want to thank Tom and Jamie again, and thank you guys. You guys are a part of the stage here with us. Thank you.